So we get to what it sounds like.
Please remain standing. I'm going to ask Emmy Stiegel to come forward and light our chalice while we recite our covenant together. Enriched by our differences and joined together in our search for meaning, we covenant with ourselves and each other to seek truth in a spirit of love, to strive for justice, and to serve others with a joyful heart. You may be seated.
Good morning. Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Church here in Media, Pennsylvania. Good to have everyone here. And if you're visiting for the first time, I'd like to extend a special welcome. If you made it through the rain and the wind to come to church at 9:30 in the morning, you deserve a special credit in heaven, and I'm sure you'll get it. It's good to have you here. And I invite you to stay after the service for our coffee hour. My name is Roger Fritz. I'm the Interim Minister, and I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have about the church if you're visiting for the first time. And look around as you're a regular member, and if you see somebody who looks like a visitor, go over and introduce yourself. You say, "Hi, I'm Roger Fritz. I've been here for about 3 months," and they'll say, "Well, I'm Joe Smith. I've been here 30 years." And that way you'll get to know each other. The Unitarian Universalist Association Disaster Relief Fund, while the impact of the storm in Florida and other parts of the country, South Carolina, is still being assessed, we know that the Unitarian Universalist congregation in Fort Myers, their building and campus has received significant damage. They just guessed at the beginning of at least $20,000, but it may be more than that. The UUA Disaster Relief Fund grants can be used for damage to congregations' buildings and relocations to temporary locations, damage to members' and friends' homes and relocation expenses, donations to local partner organizations that serve the community at large, particularly those who would not be eligible for other funding. So you can donate by going to their website hypertext giving UUA/disaster relief. And of course, there's many ways to give to support people. This is one, though, through our own association that helps Unitarian Universalists. If you're viewing this service on Zoom, please remember that you can activate closed captioning if that's a help for you. And if you'd like to talk with others about the service, there'll be a virtual coffee hour after the service, which is always entertaining. Just stay logged in and you'll be invited into the breakout room. If you're attending in person, if you're here in the room, please join us for coffee hour after the service. I think I said that already. Chrissy?
Each Sunday, as we gather in community, we bring with us whatever emotions we are experiencing. We may be full of joy or sorrow, and we honor these feelings by dropping a stone into a bowl of water. Just as the stones are held in the water, so are we held in community. Please file up this side aisle to drop your stone and return down the center aisle. Those online can chat their joys and sorrows in the chat. Thank you. And I dropped a final stone for the joys and sorrows held by those online and those unable to be with us today.
And the prayer is in one of those hymnals. So let's have a moment of silent meditation while I go grab one. Now is the time for turning. The leaves are beginning to turn from green to red and orange. The birds are beginning to turn and are heading once more towards the south. The animals are beginning to turn to store their food for the winter. For leaves, birds, and animals, turning comes instinctively. But for us, turning does not come so easily. It takes an act of will for us to make a turn. It means breaking with old habits. It means admitting that we have been wrong, and this is never easy. It means losing face. It means starting all over again. And this is always painful. It means saying, I'm sorry. It means recognizing that we have the ability to change. These things are hard to do. But unless we turn, we will be trapped forever in yesterday's ways. God, help us to turn from callousness to sensitivity, from hostility to love, from pettiness to purpose, from envy to commitment, from carelessness to discipline, from fear to faith. Turn us around and bring us back. Revive our lives as at the beginning, and turn us towards each other. For in isolation, there is no life. Amen. The offering is a sacrament of a free church. We believe it is a blessing to be able to govern and support our religious community ourselves, to make possible by our generosity everything we dream of and do to live out our shared values. You can text your donation to the number provided on the screen. Thank you.
Good morning, friends. Good morning. Okay, so I have a story today, and it is from this picture book, The Hardest Word by Jacqueline Jules, but I've adapted it a little bit for telling to you today. And this story is a story that I'm telling this week because this week on Wednesday is Yom Kippur, and our Jewish friends will be celebrating Yom Kippur, and what that means is they'll be thinking about things that they've done in the past year, maybe mistakes they've made, maybe times when they made choices that weren't the best choices. And they'll be, like we all do, and they'll be saying sorry and atoning for those choices. And atoning means we say sorry and we try to make things better. So this is a story about that. A long time ago, there was a creature called a ziz. The ziz was a huge bird. He was all red with a big tuft of yellow feathers on his head, and he had big green wings. The ziz was so big that when he would fly through the sky during the day with his wings spread out, he would block out the sun. And the parents would bring their kids inside because they thought there was a storm coming. Now, the ziz felt bad about this because he loved children and he didn't want them to have to come inside and stop playing. So he started to fly at night so he wouldn't bother the children. That's the kind of nice guy he was. Now, one day, the ziz made a mistake. The ziz was flying a little too high at night and bumped into a star. And the star fell out of the sky and it, boom, crashed into the earth. And it made a big, giant hole. The ziz was worried somebody could fall in that hole and get hurt. But he thought, I can fix this mistake. So he took a rain cloud filled with water and he put it in the hole and it made a lake. And the people loved it. Now they had a lake to swim in and boat on. It was beautiful. The ziz was so happy that he had fixed his mistake. But one day the ziz made a mistake that he couldn't fix. He was flying, this time a little too low, and he ran into a tree. And the tree fell and hit another tree and hit another tree. You get it. It hit. Lots of trees fell down like dominoes. And the last tree fell right on top of the garden at the synagogue and smushed all of the plants and fruits and vegetables. You can't fix a smushed vegetable. There's no way to do that. Now, the people in the village, they used that garden for a lot of their food. They used the plants and fruits and vegetables in the garden to decorate their sukkah when they celebrated the harvest. So this was a big deal, and Ziz didn't know what to do. So he flew up to Mount Sinai and he asked God what he should do. And God said, well, Ziz, you need to fly all over the world and find the hardest word. The hardest word you can imagine, the hardest word you can find, that's the word that is going to help you in this situation. So the Ziz did that, flew all over the place, and came back to God super excited and said, I found it. The hardest word is good night. Because nobody likes to say good night because that means you have to go to bed. And God said, well, good night can be a hard word for some people to say, but that's not the hardest word. So the Ziz kept looking. The Ziz said to God, what about rock? Rocks are really hard, right? That's not the hardest word. What about mountain? A mountain is like even bigger and harder than a rock. Not the hardest word. The Ziz kept looking. What about Rumpelstiltskin? What about anti-establishmentarianism? And God said, no, those are not the hardest words. What about, said the Ziz, God said, well, spaghetti is a hard word to say, but it's not the hardest word. So Ziz kept looking, and Ziz looked for 10 days between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And finally, Ziz flew back to Mount Sinai and said, I'm sorry, God, I cannot find the hardest word. You can't, said God. Ziz said, I can't find it, I'm sorry. You're sorry, said God. Yes, said Ziz, I am sorry. You did it, said God. You found it. You found the hardest word. Sorry is the hardest word to say. Ziz thanked God for God's wisdom, and then Ziz went to his own garden, packed up a big basket of fruits and vegetables. He had to go to the synagogue because he had to go say the hardest word. Thank you for listening to my story today. It is time we're going to send our children to RE, but before we do that, let me give one quick announcement. I want to remind parents, pickup from RE is at 10:45, not 10. You get out of church at 10:30, you go to happy hour. Go to happy hour, go to coffee hour, whatever you want to do, and nosh. And then at 10:45, you pick up your kids for RE, except if you have an 8th or 9th grader in OWL, they finish at 11. So 10:45 for most kids, 11 for OWL. And we were able to get our preschool and kindergarten classes back in the day school today. We weren't sure because we had construction all week. Those rooms are open this morning, so ignore what's written in your order of service. Kids will be picked up in their regular classrooms today. Let me know if you have any questions, and now we will sing our children out. We're going to sing through the sending song first together, and then the second time we sing it, our teachers will go out, and the third time, our kids will. Thank you. Teachers.
I have a short reading from the Jewish philosopher Martin Buber. Individuals cannot find redemption until they see the flaws in their soul and try to efface them. Nor can a nation be redeemed until it sees the flaws in its soul and tries to efface them. But whether it be an individual or a nation, whoever shuts out the realization of their flaws is shutting out redemption. We can be redeemed only to the extent to which we see ourselves. Martin Buber.
Yom Kippur, our Jewish brothers and sisters singing into this translation which is on the screen or on the back of your program.
Thank you. On Rosh Hashanah morning, the rabbi noticed little Adam was staring up at a large plaque that hung in the foyer of the synagogue. It was covered with the names, and a small American flags were mounted on either side of it. The 7-year-old had been staring at the plaque for some time, so the rabbi walked up, stood beside the boy, and said quietly, "Good morning, Adam." "Good morning, Rabbi," replied the young 7-year-old, still focused on the plaque. "Rabbi, what is this?" Adam asked. "Well, it is a memorial to all the young men and women who died in the service." Soberly, they stood together, staring at the large plaque. Little Adam's voice was barely audible when he asked, "Was it the Rosh Hashanah or the Yom Kippur service?" In the Jewish religious calendar, Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, is observed starting on sundown on Tuesday, October 4th, ending sundown on Wednesday, October 5th. For Jews, it is the holiest day of the year. It is a time when Jews are expected to come to grips with their sins, or as Unitarian Universalists prefer, their mistakes. It's not a bad practice for us to consider. Of course, first we must recognize that we have made a mistake. This can be hard to do. It takes wisdom, of course, but it also takes courage. In my own life, I remember a mistake that I made when I was 17 years old. It was a very important lesson for me. It was so important a lesson that if I had not learned it, I would not be here today. I'd gotten my driver's license a year before, and in August, just before school started, a friend and I borrowed my father's gray Dodge pickup and drove from Phoenix, where I live, up to the rim of the Grand Canyon. We drove the 250 miles in about 6 hours. When I was 17, the last 60 miles of the drive were on a dusty dirt road. We headed for a campground in Havasu Canyon. The campground is 2 miles north of a Native American village. Now, Supai, Arizona is the most remote village in the United States, the last community in our country to receive mail delivered by pack mule. The 200 people in the village call themselves Havasupai, which means people of the blue-green waters. The tribe has lived in the Grand Canyon for at least 700 years. Mid-afternoon, we started the 11-mile hike into the canyon. The temperature was 100 degrees. About 4 p.m., it started to rain heavily. The dry stream bed we had been following filled with water, and we climbed up the side of the canyon to wait for the water to recede. After a few minutes, the rain stopped. The river water slowed to a trickle. We walked on, heavy packs on our backs. The sun had set by the time we walked through the village, and it was dark by the time we camped. We spent 5 days in the canyon. Havasu Falls is 120 feet high. Mooney Falls is 190 feet high. We swam in the cool, blue-green pool of water below each of the falls. Cottonwood trees provided shade and greenery. Red sandstone cliffs rose above us towards the blue sky. Although today in summer you will find several hundred people camping, that summer, back in 1968, only a few other campers were in the canyon. We talked with a man who said he was a photographer for the National Geographic magazine. He planned to spend 6 weeks photographing the waterfalls in the canyon and the Havasu people. The National Geographic published the article 2 years later. On the 6th day of our trip, to avoid as much as possible the heat of the day, we decided to hike out as soon as it was light. Our packs were now much lighter because we had eaten the food. We walked through the village of Supai early in the morning, passing the chickens, the dogs, and the early morning cooking fires. We were well rested. We made good time hiking up the canyon. We felt good about ourselves. On our own, at the age of 17, we had bought our own food, packed it, driven 250 miles, hiked into a canyon 11 miles, fed ourselves for 5 days, and we had survived. As we hiked towards the rim, gaining altitude, Havasu Creek disappeared into the earth. The water of the creek comes from aquifers, and the water only appears above ground deep in the canyon. So we hiked along the dry stream bed, making very good time. The trail was faint along the ground, but because of the heavy rain on the day that we walked in, we did not expect much of a trail. Because of the steep walls of the canyon, we could not see far ahead of us. But that had also been the case when we walked in. We were confident that we would reach the car park with plenty of time to drive the 6 hours back to Phoenix. We were feeling strong, and we were making good time. It was a bright, beautiful, sunny day. Now, I discovered that day that after I have invested a great deal of time and energy in something, considering the possibility that I may have made a mistake is difficult, very difficult. But at some point, after hours of hiking, we begin to talk aloud about the fact that we had still not reached the car park. The hike must be longer than we realized, we thought. We must not have been making as good a time as we expected. Considering the possibility that we may have made a mistake was difficult. We began to worry about our water supply. We had full canteens when we started, but it was getting hotter and hotter. We had been drinking water on the assumption we would soon reach the road in the truck. Still, deciding that we had made a mistake was difficult. We had put much time and energy into hiking up this canyon. And making a mistake is embarrassing. It's humiliating. When we discover that we've made a mistake, we feel stupid. We feel like fools. Our human nature drives us to gain a sense of personal self-worth. In my imagination, I could see myself going back home and saying to my father, "Look what I have done. I have done something that you, Dad, have never done. I have hiked to the bottom of the Grand Canyon, camped out for 5 days, and hiked back out. You've never accomplished anything like that." It would be embarrassing to go home and say, "Dad, on the way out of the canyon, we got lost." I did not want to face my mistake because it would be embarrassing. So we hiked the trail, but small doubts began to seep in that we were going in the wrong direction. Today, I don't remember exactly what I thought back then, but it might have been something like this. I might have thought, only weaklings cut and run. I might have thought, we need to stay the course. However, if we were wrong and we did not turn around, we would die. The trail did head southeast from Supai Village and connect with a road on the rim of the Grand Canyon. This seldom used dirt trail goes 34 miles to the Grand Canyon Village in the National Park headquarters. But we would run out of water and die long before we reached the headquarters. We were on this trail. We had to find the courage to face our mistake, turn around, and go back. We had to decide. 2 17-year-old boys, alone, no adults to offer us advice. We had to find courage to admit our mistake and turn around. It was not easy, but we finally decided to turn back. Our atonement was to retrace our steps, hiking back 3 hours to the place where the 2 canyons met. Perhaps the rain of a few days before had washed away the sign showing the turn to the right. We walked back to where the creek came out of the ground and started to flow. We filled our canteens and we hiked up the right trail. Exhausted, we reached my father's gray Dodge pickup truck as the sun was setting. We had been on the trail for about 12 hours. I drove the 60 miles to Route 66 at a truck stop called Peach Springs. We ate dinner at the one restaurant, loading up on fluids and apple pie and ice cream. Tasted very good. We slept in the truck and drove back home early the next morning. It was a sincere mistake. In taking the wrong trail, we did not have an evil motivation. We did not take the wrong trail because we were hungry for power, or because we were greedy, or because we were masochists who received pleasure from walking the wrong way in the hot sun. We sincerely believed that we were going the right direction. We believed that we were doing the best that we could do for ourselves and for the people who knew and loved us and wanted us to come home safely. We were doing the best that we could do. Still, sincerity and good intentions were not enough. Taking in new information was necessary for us to survive. We had to be open to the possibility that we might have made a mistake, that we were going the wrong way. Now, I've been talking about myself here, but this experience may set up vibrations in you. Perhaps you've had a similar experience. Perhaps you also have been hit with the dismaying realization that you are not as bright or as capable as you thought you were, that you can make the dumbest kinds of errors. It is often so hard to recognize. We go along day by day doing the best we can, and then slowly we're brought up short by a mistake or a near mistake for which we know in our hearts we bear at least some responsibility. In our personal lives, errors happen repeatedly. We forget things. There are misunderstandings. We yield to temptation. We get angry. We feel insecure. We are overconfident. All of this can cause us to do things we later regret. Human existence is so structured that we will all now and again experience failures, no matter how careful we are. Because these events are an inevitable part of our lives, we need to consider how best to conduct ourselves during these times. It's wise to think about this in advance because typically when we are in trouble, we do not think with much clarity. Our thoughts are muddied by the extreme intensity of our feelings. In the Jewish tradition, a complete structure has been created to deal with these mistakes. Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, is the holiest and most solemn day of the year for Jews. It is a time when Jews are expected to come to grips with the wrongs they've committed over the past year. The evening and the day of Yom Kippur are a time for public and private confessions of guilt, a time for fasting. I talked with a rabbi. He explained to me that under Jewish law there are 5 steps to reaching atonement. First, he said, we are to recognize the sins we have committed. We are expected to be self-aware. Second, we are to resolve not to repeat the sin. We are expected to promise that what we have done, we will not do again. Third, we are to reconcile ourselves with the persons we have sinned against. We are expected to say, we are sorry, and do what we can to repair the damage. Fourth, we are to go to a sacred space, the temple, and confess our sin there. We are expected to admit our weakness in a place that is holy to us. Fifth, we are to have the opportunity to repeat the sin, the temptation to repeat the sin, and not succumb to that opportunity, not succumb to that temptation. We are expected to resist future temptation. Well, that's something like the process I went through back in 1968 at the bottom of the canyon. First, Mike and I faced the fact that we were going the wrong way. We were expected to be self-aware. That was hard. Second, grateful that we survived, we resolved never to go down that canyon again. Third, Mike and I reconciled ourselves with each other. We shared the blame equally, and we remained friends. Fourth, we confessed our mistake to our parents. They were understanding. Fifth, we did not repeat the mistake. I have hiked that trail 5 more times down to Havasupai. I've never gone the wrong way again. All of us make mistakes. I admire Yom Kippur, the Jewish Day of Atonement. Each year on the eve of that day, I examine my life. I try to find the courage and the wisdom to recognize my own mistakes, to change my behavior, to tell those I have hurt that I am sorry. I ask for forgiveness, and I resist the temptation to make the same mistake in the future. And metaphorically, I take one more step. Let's sing our closing hymn. Let us say our benediction. For those who come here to see God, may God go with you. For those who come to take his life, may life return in perfection. And for those who come to see him back, may awake now and encourage to take it step by step. Let us read. This concludes